Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Brittany of BrittanyJJones.com. If you are just tuning into my channel, welcome. I hope that you will like what you see and subscribe below for more. In today's video, we are going to be sewing. We're going to be following along to Vogue 9008. This is a Mrs. Shorts pattern and I just love the way my shorts came together. I know for a fact I'm going to make more of these for spring and summer. So before we get started, I do want to let you know if you have questions about the size that I cut, the fabric that I'm going to be using, as well as the notions that I purchased, you can watch this video right here. This is the preview video of this pattern, and I have all those details in that video. I also want to let you all know before we get into the video that I had to rework a couple things. The waistband, I cut mine wrong initially, so I had to recut another one. The tabs, I think it's a misprint in the pattern at step number 22 where it says to pin the tabs onto the waistband at the squares, but the diagram shows that they pinned them onto the shorts at the squares, but there's no squares on the shorts. So I had to kind of work around that to measure the distance between the tabs so I can just kind of estimate on how to pin them on. If you don't want to estimate though, like I did, your carrier placements, you can definitely just base your waistband onto your shorts and you'll get a more accurate placement for them, but I just guesstimated. So yeah, I hope that you all enjoy seeing me work through stumbles that I have when I'm sewing. It's all about learning and having fun. I don't mind sharing that. I'm confident in my sewing skills to show my mistakes, but also show that I'm willing to work through it and fix it. So yes, you will see me recutting my waistband, guesstimating the carrier placements, shortening the zipper, and adding a little tab to the bottom of it to just give it a nice little finish. So I'm doing all that in this video. Once you have your pattern pieces cut out, your fabric marked and notched, we can start sewing. To begin sewing our shorts for Vogue 9008, we're going to start working on our front piece pattern. So this is piece 5 for me. And we're going to begin with sewing the pleats. So you should have transferred some broken lines as well as the large circles. We're going to bring the broken lines together. I have my pins here, so I'm going to pin through to make sure that it goes through both lines. I'm going to pin that in place. I'm going to do that for the other pleat as well. So now that we have it pinned, I'm going to pin the other front the same way. Then we're going to go to the machine and we're going to start stitching at the top. Make sure that you back stitch at the beginning, and we're going to stitch all the way down to the large circle, and you back stitch at the large circle also. So let's go ahead and stitch along the broken lines now. Go ahead and stitch down your broken lines on your other front the same way. Now that I have the pleats sewn on both of my front pieces, I'm going to go ahead and press them toward the center. So I have my iron right here. Now that we have them pressed, I'm going to take it back to the machine. I'm just going to baste across this upper edge here. So I have both of my fronts basted right along the upper edge. I know it's kind of hard to see because of the fabric that I'm using, but I do have it basted right here. So now we're going to go back to the machine and do some top stitching. And I transferred my top stitching line right here beside my pleats. You can see my markings right here. So we're going to stitch down our top stitching line, and once we get to that large circle, we're going to pivot and come into that pleat line at the end of the pleat. So start up here at the top and come down to the stitching line, your dot, and then pivot to go into the large circle of the pleat. So let's go ahead and do that for both of the fronts right now. Once you have both of the fronts top stitched, we can go ahead and set these to the side and start working on our backs. So for our backs, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to do stay stitching along the upper edge, and stay stitching for this pattern will be done at 1/8 of an inch. So let's go ahead and do the stay stitching now. So I have the stay stitching done along the upper edge of the shorts, and remember it's 1/8 of an inch stay stitching for this pattern. So once we have that done, we can go ahead and grab our yoke, which is piece 7, and with right sides facing, we're going to match up our notches, and I'm going to pin in place. Once you have both of the yokes pinned on, we can go ahead and stitch it at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now that we have the yokes sewn on, you can see here I also went ahead and finished off my seam allowance. Now I'm going to press the seam up toward the yoke. Now that we have the yoke pressed and the seam facing up toward the yoke, I'm going to go back to the machine and I'm going to do a top stitch at 1/4 of an inch right from this seam right here. So let's go ahead and do our top stitch now. Now that I have the yoke top stitch at 1/4 of an inch from the seam right here, now we can put our backs to the side and start to work on our zipper. I have this 9-inch zipper and the pattern calls for a 7-inch zipper. So I'm going to shorten my zipper. I'm going to take it out of the package here. So to measure out the zipper, the pattern says to place the zipper along the opening edge and have it 3/8 of an inch below the seam line. So I have that much extending. I don't have my tab all the way up at the top. I have it down a little bit, so about right there. So I'm going to measure down to this opening edge. Here's where this dot is here, and I want to make sure that it's extending a little bit past the dot. Let me mark. So that's where the large circle was. An inch below that, so I'm at 6 1/4. That's where I'm going to shorten my zipper to. But right in between here is where I'm going to create the zipper stop. So my zipper will end right about in here, which I think is a good place for a zipper. You don't want too much hanging on the inside. So this is where I'm going to cut. I'm going to go ahead and create a new bar tack here with thread. I'm going to go to my machine and show you how to do that. If your machine can't do it, you can always get a needle and thread and just stitch around the zipper a couple times, the zipper teeth, and then that creates a stop as well. So I'm going to go ahead and change my stitch so that it drops the feed though, that they won't rise up and stitch my zipper through. The zipper will just stay put. So I have my 2 markings and I'm just going to put them right between where I want to create the new zipper stop forward. I'm just going to go back and forth on it. Okay, so I have created a new stop for my zipper. So the zipper stops here now. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut it at the second line. Or my second marking, so I have it trimmed there. And sometimes people like to cover this raw edge of the zipper so that it's just not exposed. And to do that, I'm going to just get a piece of my scrap fabric. So here's some scrap fabric here, and I'm just going to cut about 1 inch width of it. I don't want it to be too bulky, but I do want to fold in the raw edges on it. And then I'm going to put the zipper in it to see if that's the length that I want. Okay, so now this is a 2x2. Let's try this width. I'm going to fold in about 1/8 or 1/4 on the sides. Slide the zipper in, fold the sides in, press up the back. I'm trying to make sure that I have this even so that when I stitch across, it will catch the back also. Okay, I think this is gonna work. So I cut a 2x2. This is what the end of my thread looks like. So yes, I'm gonna go ahead and stitch this. If you don't have any more scrap fabric, or if your fabric is heavy, then some bias tape works just the same. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and stitch this all around. I'll show you what it looks like when I'm all done. All right, y'all, so here's a close-up of my zipper stop. I sewed all the way around it first, and then I did diagonals in it, making an X. So this is what my new zipper looks like with the new zipper stop. We can go ahead and insert this into our shorts now. Before we move on to the next step of stitching between the large circle and the notch on our front two pieces, I'm gonna go ahead and finish off these edges with my serger. So all the way from the top around the fly and all the way down the inner leg of the shorts, I'm gonna go ahead and finish those off now. So this is it at the top of the pant and going around the fly and then coming down here to go to around the crotch and the inner leg. I have that finished off. So I'm gonna just finish off the other leg the same way. Now that I have the seams finished off, I'm going to put them right sides facing. Should have transferred a large circle as well as snipped into a notch here. I'm going to line up these pieces, find my notches, pin there. So now we can go ahead and stitch between this notch and this large circle using our regular machine stitch. And then from the large circle up to the top of the pant, we're going to do a basting stitch. So let's do that now. Okay, now that we have the center front basted and we've stitched between our large circle and our notch, now we can turn our left fly extension to the inside along the fold line. So here is the square for my fold line. So I'm going to make sure I'm using my left side. I'm going to fold along that fold line. I also snipped up here at the top. I'm going to give that a press. So again, we just folded the left front fly extension along the fold line. The right, we did not do anything to it. We still have that laying out flat. So it should look like this right now. So working on the left front, I'm going to flip my pants so they're like this and that we have the left sticking out like so. So this is the left fly extension that we just pressed. We're going to take our zipper and we're going to put the zipper stop right here at this marking, this square that we transferred. So here is my marking. I'm going to put a pin there so I know where my marking is. Now my zipper is still a little bit longer, but I'm okay with that. I'm just going to stop my stitching right here. I'm not going to stitch all the way down the zipper because it just needs to stop right here at the X. So I'm going to pin this zipper in place. So once you have the zipper pinned on, we're going to go ahead and stitch it close to the zipper teeth right here along the fold of the left fly extension. Now that we have this side of the zipper stitched to the left front fly, I'll give you a close-up. You can see right here how I stitched as close as I could to the press edge. Now we're going to open out the shorts and just kind of let the zipper fall and do its thing. Like, we don't need to move it or anything. The zipper will kind of just naturally fall in place. Wherever that zipper falls, grab your pin and we're just going to pin it to the right fly extension only, not to the pant. So let's pin the zipper in place. Now we can take this to the machine and we can stitch down this side of the zipper. Once you have the other side of the zipper stitched to the right fly extension, we can move to the next step. All right, so the next step is for us to baste the right fly extension to the front of the short. So I'm just have it laying flat here and I'm just going to pin it in place. Now I'm going to take it to the machine. I'm just going to baste right along this side of the fly extension. So now I have my right front extension. It's basted onto the front of my pant here. So the next step is to go ahead and flip it onto the right side and you can follow along with your stitching line to do the top stitching to create that fly stitch. So if you don't have your marking, you can always grab your tissue paper and transfer your line. Make sure that you line up the center front with this basting stitch there. And you can just retrace your stitching line so that you get a nice stitching line on the outside of your shorts. So you can go ahead and do that, and then we can stitch along the stitching line on the outside of our shorts now. Once you have stitched the fly along the stitching line, we can go ahead and remove all of our basting stitches. Okay, so now we have a working fly. Yay! All right, y'all, let's move on to the next step. The next step, we're going to put our front to back, right sides facing, and we're going to stitch down this inner leg seam. So here is my back, and you can see I finished those off. So with right sides facing, I'm going to grab my pins and pin in place. Once you have it pinned, we can go ahead and stitch it at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now that I have the inner leg seam sewn, I'm going to go ahead and press these out flat. So here's my iron. Once we have the inner leg seams pressed open, now we're going to put them together and stitch the remaining center back seam together, as well as continue up here where we previously left off when we first started sewing. Once you have pinned together your crotch seam, now we can take it to the machine and stitch it at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then we're going to reinforce this center right here, the center curve, by stitching at a 1/4 of an inch within the seam allowance, and then we will trim it close to that 1/4 of an inch. So now let's go ahead and do our 5/8 of an inch and then do our 1/4 of an inch stitch. Once you have finished sewing your crotch seam, now we can put the front and back to the side and start working on our pockets. Before I insert my pockets into the shorts, I'm going to take it to the machine and finish off the outer edge of the pocket with my serger. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So now that I have my pockets, they're all finished off with my serger along the outer edge of the pockets. Now we can pin them to the shorts, right sides facing for the front and the back. So I'm going to find my notch and line my pocket up and pin it in place. Go ahead and pin the other 2 pockets on for your back the same way. Now that you have all 4 pockets pinned on, now we can go to the sewing machine and stitch them in a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now that we have our pockets sewn on, we can go ahead and press them toward the seam. So I'm going to grab my iron here, and I'm going to press all 4 of the pockets so that they are facing out toward the seam. Now that we have the pockets pressed, I'm going to go ahead and put my front and back right sides facing. I'm going to grab my pins and we are going to stitch from the top to this first large circle. We're going to leave this open and then we're going to begin stitching again at this dot down to the hem of the pants. We are not going to stitch the pocket closed right now. So again, I'm going to grab my pins and I'm going to pin from here to this large circle, leave this open, begin stitching here and back stitch, and then continue sewing to the hem, leaving the pocket unsewn. So now that we have the side seam sewn, and again, we left the pockets open, they should not be closed just yet. Now we're going to go ahead and grab our ironing board and we are going to press our pocket toward the front pocket only, not the back. You're going to take your front pocket and press it toward the front along the seam line. Just going to put a pin in to hold it in place. So now that our pants look like this, we're going to go to our sewing machine. I'm going to also pin my back pocket out of the way so I don't accidentally stitch it, because we're not stitching the pockets together right now. So I'm just going to pin my back pocket out of the way. And now we're going to top stitch right along this pocket, along the front pocket only, and we're going to square it off at the large circles that we transferred. So you should have transferred those circles. I still have mine right here. I can see them. So we are going to top stitch right along the front pocket only, right along this edge, and then square it off to the large circles that we transferred. Now that we have that top stitching done on the front of our pocket, here's my top stitching right here. And again, we have the pocket going toward the front. I'm going to turn my pants to the inside. So now we can go ahead and stitch our pocket closed. So I have some pins here. I'm going to pin the other pocket the same way and go ahead and stitch it all the way around now. Now that we have the pockets, both of them are finished all the way around. Now we can turn our pockets toward the front and baste them across the upper edge. I'm going to put 2 pins up here just to hold it in place. I'm going to pin my other pocket the same way and then go to my sewing machine and just put a basting stitch right along this upper edge of the pocket. Once we have the pockets basted toward the front, then we can go ahead and grab our scissors and we can clip the back seam allowance right up under the pocket here. So I have my scissors and I'm just going to clip the back seam allowance only. And now I can press my side seams open flat. So I'm going to do that to the other side. Again, just clipping the back seam allowance only right up under the pocket. Now that I have the back seam allowance clipped and I press the seam open, I'm going to go ahead and put these to the side now and start working on my waistband. The first thing that we need to do is trim down our right front waistband, the right lining waistband, as well as the right interfacing. So I am going to find my pieces and I have the notches. The notches is where the side seam is. So that's a left. Here's a right. Here's a left, here's my side seam, so here's a right. And for the right only, the right interfacing, the right facing, and the right waistband or the right lining, there is a cutting line right here on the pattern piece. So here's the center front and here's the cutting line. And I snipped into my cutting lines through my pattern for my fabric. So here's my side notch here. I'm gonna line that up, line up my cutting line. So this is the part that we're going to cut off for our right front waistband piece. It's the front lining and the front interfacing. So I'm just going to follow along with my snips right here that I made. Trim that off for that one. Okay, so now that we have the front pieces of the waistband trimmed, we can move on to the next step. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and fuse the interface into both of our front pieces. So I'm gonna put the lining and the pattern piece to the side now. I'm gonna go ahead and grab my other front waistbands. On the right front one, I'm going to trim right here. Just trim a little bit of that corner off like so. So let's go ahead and fuse our interface into both of our fronts as well as our back waistbands now. Now that we have all the waistbands fused with interfacing, here are my two backs and here are my two front waistbands. First, we're going to pin our backs together at the center seam, and I'm going to pin them in place. And then we're going to take our fronts, match up our notches. Once we have it pinned, we can go ahead and stitch at all of the seams for our waistband now. So now that I have my waistband sewn, I've also gone ahead and pressed the seams open flat. We can put this to the side and get our carrier piece. Here's my carrier piece, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna fold it in half, give that a press, then we'll open it out and fold in the raw edges to that crease that will be in the middle. Press those sides down and then fold it again and give it a press. Take it to the machine, then we're going to stitch on both long edges of this using an edge stitch. So let's go ahead and do our carrier piece now. Once you have your carrier piece all pressed and sewn, it should look like this, and we're going to cut the carrier piece into 6 equal pieces that measure 3 3/4 of an inch. So I already cut one right here, and I'm going to use this as a guide to cut my others. So we have 6 equal pieces that measures 3 3/4 of an inch. So with each carrier, we are going to fold in 5/8 of an inch on one of the short ends. Now we're going to go ahead and press this down. Once you have it pressed, we're going to trim it down to 1/4 of an inch. So now we're going to go ahead and do the other carriers the same way. First, we're going to press under 5/8 of an inch and then trim it down to 1/4 of an inch. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, so now that I have my carriers all pressed and ready to go, I have my shorts right here. And this is one instruction that kind of had me scratching my head just a little bit. So I'm going to zoom in so you can see. Right here on step 22, it says with right size up, pin carriers to waistband, centering over squares at lower edge and having raw edges even based across edges. Okay, pin carriers to waistband, but they're showing the shorts. And there are no squares on the shorts. The squares are indeed on the waistband. I think they meant to put pin carriers to the pants, but there are no squares on our pants. All of the squares are on the waistband pieces. So I guess we can measure things out. So from the center front, our first square is about 4 inches over. So here's my center front here, and about 4 inches over has me right at this first pleat. I'm just going to put the carriers right sides facing. So I have the pressed edge facing up, and I'm going to pin that in place. And for this side, I'm just going to take my carrier and pin it right in front of the pleat like I did this one, the first pleat. So let's just continue to measure from our pattern piece. So there we have our carriers pinned on. I'm gonna go ahead now and just baste across the top of all the carriers. Now that we have the carriers basted onto the upper edge of the pants, now we can go ahead and take our waistband and we can go ahead and pin it right sides facing. So let's find our notches and start pinning our waistband all the way around in place. Once you have the waistband pinned, we can go ahead and stitch it in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then we can trim it and press our seam facing up toward the waistband. So let's go ahead and do that now. So now that we have the waistband sewn onto our shorts and we've trimmed and pressed our seam up toward the waistband, now we can grab our lining pieces or your waistband facing pieces. We want to go ahead and stitch those the same exact way that we did for the waistband pieces. So go ahead and stitch your center back seam together and then stitch the fronts to the back at the side seam. Press those open flat, and then we're going to fold in 5/8 of an inch and press that, and then trim that down to 3/8 of an inch. So go ahead and do your waistband facing like I have done here for mine. We can go ahead and pin it right sides facing to our waistband. Okay, y'all, so I want to make one quick correction really quickly because I just had to undo my waistband facing or my lining piece, and here's why. When I laid out the pieces to cut the right size, remember I said the front waistband and the front waistband lining and the front interfacing, we had to cut along this cutting line. Okay, so I laid out both of my right pieces facing up. And that was a mistake. One needs to be facing down, and here's why. If I cut out both of my pieces, and I did, here's my other one right here. Here's the side seam. You can see the notch right here. So I had that sewn at 5/8 of an inch. When you cut them both out on the right sides with right sides facing up, then when it's time to stitch them right sides facing, to stitch your facing to your waistband so we can stitch along the top edge and fold this in nice and neat, we won't be able to do that. So I just wanted to clarify that because I just had to cut 2 new waistband pieces. So now I can go ahead and stitch the side seams to my waistband lining together now. But right sides facing, let's go ahead and take our waistband lining and put it right sides to the waistband and pin. Continue pinning your waistband lining to your waistband all the way around now. Now that we have the waistband lining pinned onto the waistband, we can go ahead and stitch right here on these front ends. We're going to stitch these down as well as all the way around the upper edge. Once we have it stitched, we can trim our seam and then do understitching as far as we can go. We won't be able to get all the way in here without understitching, but just understitch your lining as far as you can go. I have the waistband lining understitched, so now I can turn everything to the inside. Grab my point turner and gently poke the corner out. Same thing for the other side. Turn the lining to the inside and give it a press. Continue turning in your lining and pressing it in place. Now that I have my waistband lining pressed toward the inside and I have this pressed edge of the waistband lining right over that seam, I'm going to grab my needle and thread and I'm going to go and slip stitch the waistband lining in place. If you don't want to do slip stitching, maybe you can do a stitch in the ditch if you prefer that, but I am going to go ahead and do my slip stitching and I'll be right back to show you when I'm all done. Before I close up my waistband lining with my slip stitch, I did want to mention if you had a label that you want to sew into your shorts, this is the best time to do it before you close up that lining. I mean, you could also just stitch through both the waistband and the waistband lining if you forget to do it. But if you don't want the stitching to show on the back of your shorts, you can go ahead and stitch it onto your lining now before you stitch in the ditch or slip stitch it closed. Once you have your waistband finished, if you slip stitched it or if you did the stitch in the ditch, once you have the waistband finished, the next step is for us to fold up that pressed edge of our carrier. Pin it to the waistband at the top. I'm gonna grab my pin. And then we can go ahead and stitch at the very top of the carrier. Once you have them all pinned, we can take them to the machine and we can edge stitch right along the top of the carriers. So I have my carriers all edge stitched along the top of the waistband. The next step is to go ahead and sew on our hook and bar. So the hook part will go to the right side and the bar will go onto the left. So go ahead and get your needle and thread. I have mine right here. I'm gonna go ahead and stitch on my hook and bar now. Once you have your hook and bars sewn on, now we can move on to the last step, and that is our hem. So the hem allowance is 1 1/4. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna press up our hem. We're gonna press up the full 1 1/4, and then we can press as well as baste right along this fold right here, just to keep our hem in place. And then we're gonna fold in that raw edge at 1/4 inch, give that a press as well as baste close to this inner pressed edge, and on the outside we're going to top stitch right along that fold. That's this inner pressed edge right here. We're going to follow that basting stitch with a top stitch to create our hem. So let's go ahead and do all of the pressing and basting, and then we'll be all done with our shorts. Thank you all so much for joining me for another Sew With Me video. I really do hope that you all enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please leave them for me down below. I'll be more than happy to answer. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on your notifications, and I will see you all in the next video. Blessings, everyone. Bye.